My name is Kate Brown, a 26-year-old veterinary assistant struggling to make ends meet in Seattle. What should have been a simple family brunch at my aunt's lakeside home turned into an absolute nightmare when my grandmother Margaret casually mentioned, "I hope you're enjoying the veterinary clinic I purchased for you." I nearly choked on my mimosa, whispering back, "Grandma, I work as an assistant at someone else's clinic." The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation around the patio table stopped as my mother's face went ashen. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from and tell us if you've ever discovered that your entire family has been keeping massive secrets from you. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. Life before that devastating brunch had been a constant struggle. As a veterinary assistant in Seattle, I was barely scraping by on $18 an hour, living in a studio apartment in Ballard that I shared with my rescue cat Oliver. The apartment was cramped, with paper-thin walls that let me hear every argument from my neighbors. My dream was to become a veterinarian myself, but veterinary school costs were astronomical, and despite working full-time and taking night classes, I was nowhere near having the funds to apply. My family situation was complicated, to put it mildly. My parents, David and Sarah Brown, had divorced when I was 12 after a bitter custody battle that lasted 2 years. The divorce split more than just assets, it fractured our entire extended family into camps. My mother, Sarah, quickly remarried Marcus Wellington, a successful tech executive with political aspirations and very specific ideas about success. They lived in a sprawling modern house in Bellevue with my half-sister Emma, now 14, and seemed to exist in a completely different world from mine. My father, David, had moved to Portland immediately after the divorce to start fresh, which apparently meant minimal contact with his daughter. Our relationship consisted of awkward phone calls on birthdays and holidays, and the occasional guilt-driven check for $200 when he remembered I was struggling. He worked in construction and had remarried a woman named Linda who made it clear that his past life, including me, was not particularly welcome in their new family dynamic. Then there was my older sister Jessica, the golden child who could do no wrong. At 29, she was already a successful marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, married to a software engineer named Ryan, and living in a beautiful craftsman house in Queen Anne. My mother never missed an opportunity to highlight Jessica's achievements or suggest that I should follow her example of choosing a practical career path. "Jessica just got another promotion," my mother would announce during our monthly obligatory dinners. "The company is sending her to New York for a leadership conference. She's being fast-tracked for senior management." The unspoken comparison was always there. Why couldn't I be more like Jessica? Why was I wasting my potential working with animals instead of pursuing something financially rewarding? The only person who had ever truly supported my passion for veterinary medicine was my grandmother Margaret, my mother's mother. At 78, she was a retired nurse who understood the calling to care for living beings. She had worked in pediatric nursing for 40 years and had always encouraged my love for animals. When I was a child, she would take me to her friend's farm outside the city, where I learned to care for injured birds and help deliver kittens. "You have a gift with animals, Kate," she would tell me, her eyes twinkling with pride. "I've watched you calm a terrified rescue dog in minutes and nurse a wounded raccoon back to health. That's not something you can learn in business school." Even as an adult, when everyone else questioned my career choice, Grandma Margaret remained my strongest advocate. Despite my financial struggles, I had stubbornly refused help from my family. Part of it was pride. After years of being compared unfavorably to Jessica, I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own terms. But it was also about maintaining independence. My mother and stepfather had a history of offering help with strings attached, usually involving suggestions that I reconsider my career path and pursue something more practical like Jessica had done. I would rather eat ramen noodles for dinner and work double shifts than accept financial assistance that came with lectures about my life choices. In the months leading up to that fateful brunch, I had actually started feeling hopeful. I had been accepted into the pre-veterinary program at University of Washington, and while I couldn't afford the tuition immediately, I was planning to save for another year and apply for additional scholarships. My supervisor at the animal clinic had also hinted at a possible promotion to senior assistant, which would come with a modest raise. When my Aunt Caroline called to invite me to a family celebration brunch at her lakeside home in Kirkland, I was surprised but cautiously optimistic. Aunt Caroline was my mother's younger sister, and while we weren't particularly close, she had always been kind to me. Maybe this was a chance to reconnect with my extended family on better terms. I spent my morning off getting ready, choosing a simple sundress that wouldn't look too out of place among my family's designer outfits, and trying to psych myself up for what would inevitably be a few hours of subtle criticism about my life choices. Just smile and nod, I told myself as I drove my aging Honda Civic across the floating bridge. Maybe we can have one family gathering without drama. How wrong I was. That brunch would not only expose years of deception, but would fundamentally change how I saw my family and myself. Aunt Caroline's lakeside home was exactly the kind of place my mother's family gravitated toward, tasteful, expensive, and perfectly maintained. The deck overlooking Lake Washington was set with fine china and fresh flowers, creating the kind of Instagram-worthy scene that my mother loved. I arrived exactly on time, my nervous energy carrying me up the stone pathway to the front door. Aunt Caroline greeted me with a warm hug, which was already more affection than I typically received at family gatherings. "Kate, you look wonderful. I'm so glad you could make it." Inside, the house was filled with the familiar faces of my mother's side of the family. My mother and Marcus were already seated on the deck, my mother looking elegant in a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Marcus barely looked up from his phone when I said hello, offering a distracted nod in my direction. Jessica arrived shortly after me with Ryan, looking impeccable as always in a designer dress that perfectly complemented her professionally styled hair. She air-kissed my cheek and immediately launched into a detailed account of her latest work triumph. "The Peterson campaign was a complete success," she explained to the gathered relatives. "We exceeded engagement targets by 40%, and the client is already talking about expanding our contract." Marcus perked up at this, leaning forward with interest. "Impressive numbers. That kind of performance gets noticed at the executive level." My mother beamed with pride. "Jessica has such a natural talent for strategy. The partners at her firm say she's the youngest director they've ever had." I sipped my mimosa and tried to look interested, though I could already feel the familiar weight of being the family disappointment. When Uncle Robert asked what I was up to these days, I mentioned my acceptance into the pre-vet program, which received polite but lukewarm responses. "That's nice, dear," my mother said with a tight smile. "Though I do hope you're considering more financially viable options as well. Veterinary school is terribly expensive, and the debt load can be crushing." Before I could respond, the conversation had already moved on to Jessica's upcoming vacation to Europe with Ryan. That was typical. My achievements were acknowledged briefly and then dismissed, while Jessica's were celebrated and discussed at length. The meal proceeded pleasantly enough, with my relatives catching up on their successful children's accomplishments and their own professional victories. I found myself playing the role of the quiet cousin, nodding and smiling while feeling increasingly like an outsider at my own family gathering. Then Grandma Margaret arrived. At 78, she still commanded attention when she entered a room. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she moved with the confident stride of someone who had spent decades caring for others. She made her way around the table, greeting everyone with genuine warmth, but when she reached me, her embrace lasted longer than the others. "There's my animal whisperer," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "How are the furry patients treating you?" For the first time that morning, I felt truly seen and valued. "They're keeping me busy," I replied, "though I'm excited about starting the pre-vet program." Grandma Margaret's face lit up. "That's wonderful news. I knew you'd find a way to pursue your calling." After we had finished our main course and were enjoying coffee and pastries, Grandma Margaret reached into her elegant handbag and pulled out a small, gift-wrapped box. "I brought something for you, Kate," she said, sliding it across the table to me. "Consider it a congratulations gift for getting into the veterinary program." Inside was a beautiful vintage watch, clearly expensive and meaningful. This was your great-grandmother's, she explained. She was a midwife, one of the few women in her time who worked in healthcare. I thought you should have it since you're following in the family tradition of caring for living beings. I was genuinely touched, and for a moment, the brunch felt like a celebration of my choices rather than a critique of them. Then Grandma Margaret leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile and asked the question that would shatter everything. Speaking of your veterinary career, how are you enjoying the clinic I purchased for you? I drove by the building last week and the renovations look beautiful. That location on Capitol Hill should be perfect for building a client base. The mimosa glass slipped from my hand, though I managed to catch it before it hit the table. What clinic on Capitol Hill? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The conversation around the table began to die down as people sensed something was wrong. Grandma Margaret looked confused. The veterinary clinic I bought for you, of course. The beautiful space on 15th Avenue with the large windows and separate surgical suite. I know you wanted to work independently, but I thought having your own practice would help you establish yourself in the field. The sound of my mother's fork clattering against her plate seemed to echo across the suddenly silent deck. I looked from my grandmother's perplexed expression to my mother's rapidly paling face. Grandma, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, I work as an assistant at Green Lake Animal Hospital. I've never owned a clinic. I've never even been to 15th Avenue to look at veterinary spaces. The temperature on the deck seemed to drop despite the warm spring sunshine. Jessica stared intently at her coffee cup while Marcus suddenly became very interested in adjusting his watch. Only Emma, my 14-year-old half-sister, looked as confused as I felt. That's impossible, Grandma Margaret said firmly. I transferred $400,000 to your mother 18 months ago to purchase and renovate a veterinary clinic for you as a career launch gift. All the paperwork was handled through Sarah since you were so busy with work and school. All eyes turned to my mother, whose face had transitioned from pale to a mottled red. She cleared her throat and reached for her water glass, taking a long, deliberate sip before speaking. Margaret, this is hardly the appropriate time or place to discuss financial matters, she said, her voice strained. We can talk about this privately later. No, I said, my voice stronger now. I think now is exactly the right time. What clinic, Mom? What is Grandma talking about? The waiter from the catering company chose that unfortunate moment to approach our table, asking if anyone needed fresh coffee. The chorus of tight, forced smiles and murmured responses must have looked bizarre, but he retreated quickly, sensing the tension that had settled over our previously cheerful gathering. As soon as he was out of earshot, Grandma Margaret spoke again, her voice lower but intense. Sarah, what have you done with the money I entrusted to you for Kate's clinic? My mother's response was cut off by Marcus's attempt at damage control. This is clearly just a misunderstanding, he said, placing his hand on my grandmother's arm. Let's enjoy the rest of our brunch and you ladies can sort out the details tomorrow. But I could see from the rigid set of my grandmother's shoulders and the way my mother avoided meeting anyone's eyes that this was no misunderstanding. Something was very wrong, and the sinking feeling in my stomach told me that my family's carefully maintained facade was about to crumble completely. The remainder of brunch passed in excruciating slow motion. We picked at our food in near silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware against fine china and the distant laughter of other families enjoying their Sunday morning by the lake. Aunt Caroline, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source, made several attempts at light conversation that fell flat. I think we should continue this discussion at our house, my mother finally said, signaling to Marcus that it was time to leave. This is a private family matter. No one disagreed, though I noticed that several relatives began making excuses about other commitments, clearly eager to escape whatever drama was unfolding. 20 minutes later, our awkward convoy of cars pulled into my mother and Marcus's circular driveway in Bellevue. The modern house loomed large and imposing against the overcast Seattle sky, its floor-to-ceiling windows and stark lines a testament to Marcus's preference for contemporary design over warmth. We gathered in the formal living room, a space that was rarely used except for entertaining. The furniture was beautiful but uncomfortable, chosen more for appearance than livability. I perched on the edge of a sleek gray sofa while Grandma Margaret remained standing, her posture rigid with barely contained anger. "Sarah," she said once everyone was seated, "I want an explanation and I want it now. Where is the veterinary clinic I purchased for Kate?" My mother smoothed her blouse nervously, a gesture I recognized from childhood. "Mom, you need to understand that these decisions are complex. I was acting in Kate's best interest." "That doesn't answer my question," Grandma Margaret replied, her voice steel. "I transferred $400,000 to your account specifically for the purchase and renovation of a veterinary clinic for Kate. I have the bank records and our written agreement right here." From her purse, she withdrew an envelope and placed several documents on the coffee table. Among them was a letter written on my mother's personal stationery acknowledging receipt of the funds and their intended purpose. "Mom, is this true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did Grandma give you $400,000 to buy me a veterinary clinic 18 months ago?" My mother stood abruptly and walked to the bar cart in the corner of the room. She poured herself a generous glass of white wine despite it being barely past noon, then turned to face us. "Yes," she finally admitted. "The money was transferred to me." "Then where is my clinic?" I demanded, anger beginning to replace shock. "And why am I working as an assistant for $18 an hour when I apparently had the funds to start my own practice?" "You weren't ready," she said, taking a large swallow of her wine. "You're still just an assistant, Kate. You don't have your veterinary degree yet, and you've never run a business. I couldn't in good conscience set you up with your own clinic when you haven't shown the maturity or experience to manage it properly." The condescension in her voice was like a physical slap. "So you just kept the money? Used it for yourself?" "I invested it," she said defensively. "Marcus is a financial advisor among his other talents. That's what responsible people do with large sums of money. The funds aren't gone, they've just been put to better use until you're in a more stable position." "Sarah," Grandma Margaret cut in, "that money was not yours to invest. It was a gift to your daughter with very specific intentions that you acknowledged in writing." "Mom, please," Jessica spoke for the first time since we'd arrived at the house. "I'm sure Mom was just trying to protect the investment until Kate was more established in her career." "Stay out of this, Jessica," I snapped, then paused as a thought occurred to me. "Wait, did you know about this?" The way she averted her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I knew Grandma had given Mom money for you, but I thought you knew too and had worked something out together." "Worked something out?" I repeated incredulously. Why would I choose to work as an assistant making $18 an hour if I knew I had my own clinic waiting for me? "Because you're always so insistent about making it on your own," she replied. "You reject every offer of help. I thought maybe you were being stubborn about accepting Grandma's gift." I shook my head in disbelief. My sister, who I had always envied for her success and financial stability, had known about my inheritance and said nothing while I struggled to pay rent and buy groceries. "So where exactly is this money now?" Grandma Margaret demanded. "I want specifics, Sarah." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her designer chair. "It's been allocated across several investment vehicles." "Which ones?" Grandma pressed. "This is getting ridiculous," Marcus interrupted. "Sarah is married to someone with extensive financial experience. We made judgment calls that the money would be better protected in diversified investments than tied up in a risky small business venture for someone who doesn't even have her veterinary degree yet." His words stung, but they also fueled my growing anger. This isn't about my degree or my experience level. This is about Mom taking money that was meant for me and using it however she wanted without even telling me it existed. "It wasn't just random investments," my mother finally admitted, staring into her wine glass. "The majority was used to fund Jessica and Ryan's house down payment and some of Marcus's political campaign expenses. Both are sound investments that will provide returns." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only had my mother diverted my gift to investments, but she had chosen to invest it in ways that primarily benefited Jessica and Marcus. You used my clinic money to buy Jessica's house and fund Marcus's political ambitions? I asked, my voice hollow. While knowing I was living in a studio apartment and struggling to afford groceries? It wasn't like that, Jessica protested weakly. The house was a good investment and Marcus's campaign work benefits the community. We always planned to pay it back with interest. That wasn't your decision to make. I shouted, jumping to my feet. Neither of you had the right to decide what happens with a gift that was meant for me. Marcus rolled his eyes. This is exactly why Sarah made the right call. Look at how emotionally you're reacting. This is why you weren't ready for that kind of financial responsibility. I turned to him, fury building. Did you know too? Was everyone in this family aware that I had a clinic fund except me? His slight hesitation was telling. I was aware that Margaret had made a generous gift, and I supported Sarah's decision to manage it responsibly until you demonstrated more professional maturity. Manage it by giving it to Jessica and yourself, I laughed bitterly. That's rich, Marcus. Really rich. The money went to solid investment opportunities, my mother insisted. Investments that will ultimately benefit the whole family. How exactly does it benefit me? I demanded. While I'm skipping meals to afford my rent and working double shifts to save for veterinary school? You're being dramatic, Jessica said dismissively. If things were really that bad, you could have asked for help. I shouldn't have had to ask. I shouted. Grandma already helped me. You all just decided I didn't deserve to know about it. Emma, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. Is that why you told me not to mention the clinic when I talked to Kate? She asked my mother, her young face troubled. You said it was a surprise for later, but that was over a year ago. The betrayal cut even deeper. Even my teenage half-sister had been instructed to keep secrets from me. Grandma Margaret placed a steadying hand on my shoulder before turning to face my mother with a look of profound disappointment. Sarah, I am deeply disappointed in you. This isn't just about the money. This is about trust, respect, and honesty. You have betrayed all three where your daughter is concerned. My mother's face hardened. You've always favored Kate, even when her choices make no financial sense. Veterinary medicine is a difficult field with long hours and modest income. I was trying to protect her from making a mistake by helping her see there are better options. By lying to her? Grandma shot back. By giving her inheritance to her sister? That's not protection, Sarah. That's manipulation and control. As the argument escalated between my mother and grandmother, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. If my mother had been willing to divert this gift, what else might she have manipulated throughout my life? Mom, I said, cutting through their heated exchange, the scholarship I received for my veterinary assistant certification, was that real or did Grandma pay for that too? The flash of guilt across both women's faces confirmed my suspicion before either could speak. It was a private scholarship, my grandmother finally admitted. I established it through the Community College Foundation, but yes, I funded it specifically to help you start your career in animal care. And my job at Green Lake Animal Hospital, I continued, already knowing the answer. The one I thought I got based on my interview and references? Grandma Margaret looked away. I knew Dr. Patterson from my nursing days. I asked him to give your application special consideration, but you earned the position with your skills and dedication, Kate. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Achievements I had been proud of, moments when I thought I had proven my worth on merit alone, suddenly felt hollow and contrived. So I never actually earned anything on my own, I whispered. It was all just arranged for me. That's not true, Grandma Margaret insisted. I only opened doors. You walked through them with your own talent and hard work. But the damage was done. In trying to protect me from my mother's manipulations, my grandmother had created her own, leaving me questioning every accomplishment in my professional life. I can't believe this, I said, looking around at the faces of my family members. Every single one of you has lied to me or kept secrets from me for years. We were trying to help you, Jessica said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. No, I replied coldly. You were helping yourselves feel superior. Poor Kate, the struggling veterinary assistant who needs everyone's help but doesn't know it. Must have been entertaining watching me stress about money while you all knew I had $400,000 sitting in Mom's investment accounts. It wasn't like that, my mother protested. We wanted what was best for you. What was best for me? I repeated, my voice rising. How would you know what's best for me when you've never once actually listened to what I want or respected my choices? The room fell silent. In that moment, looking at the faces of my family, I realized that I had spent years trying to earn approval from people who would never truly see me for who I was. They saw only the version of me they wanted to see, the wayward daughter who needed guidance, the impractical dreamer who would eventually come to her senses. I'm done, I said quietly. I'm done trying to make you proud of choices you'll never respect. I'm done seeking approval from people who lie to me. And I'm done with all of you. With those words, I grabbed my purse and walked toward the front door, ignoring the calls of my name behind me. As I stepped into the cool Seattle air, tears finally began to fall. But underneath the hurt was something unexpected, a sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was seeing my family clearly, without the distortion of hope or the burden of trying to earn their approval. Now I had to figure out what to do next. I had only made it halfway down the driveway when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw Emma jogging to catch up, her long legs awkward in the dress shoes she'd worn to brunch. Kate, wait, she called. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was supposed to be a secret until it was too late. I stopped, touched by her genuine distress. It's not your fault, Emma. You were just a kid when this all started. She bit her lip, looking uncertain. Are you really done with all of us? Even me? The question pierced through my anger. No, not with you. Never with you. You're the only honest person in this family. Before she could respond, the front door opened again. My mother emerged, followed closely by my grandmother, their voices carrying across the manicured lawn. You had no right to bring this up at a family gathering, my mother was saying. We could have handled this privately. Like you've been handling it for the past 18 months? Grandma shot back. How much longer would you have kept this from her if I hadn't mentioned it today? My grandmother caught sight of me standing with Emma and changed direction, heading toward us with determined strides despite her age. My mother followed, her face a storm cloud of anger and defensiveness. Kate, Grandma Margaret called, please don't leave like this. We need to fix this situation. Fix it? I asked bitterly as they reached us. The money is gone, invested in Jessica's house and Marcus's political career. And frankly, that's not even what hurts the most. The money is not gone, my mother insisted. It's invested. There's a difference. Stop saying that. I snapped. Just stop pretending this was about financial management. This was about you deciding once again that you know better than me what I need, what I can handle, what I deserve. Because I do know better. She exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. Look at your life, Kate. 26 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A studio apartment and an $18 an hour job while your sister has a real career, a beautiful home, a stable future. The truth of how she saw me, laid bare at last, hit like a physical blow. I stepped back, bumping into Emma, who steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. Mom, that's not fair, Emma protested, surprising all of us with her intervention. Stay out of this, Emma, my mother warned. No, my 14-year-old half-sister replied, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Kate is the only one who ever really listens to me. The only one who cares about what I want instead of what you and Marcus want for me. The front door opened again, and now Jessica and Marcus joined our driveway confrontation, creating a bizarre family tableau for any neighbors who might be watching. Sarah, bring this inside immediately, Marcus hissed. The Hendersons across the street are watching. I don't care who's watching, I said. I want answers. I want to know why my entire family conspired to keep this from me. I didn't conspire to do anything, Jessica protested. I only found out about the clinic fund when Mom and Marcus asked Ryan and me to invest some of it in our house down payment. And you didn't think to mention it to me? Your own sister? She at least had the decency to look ashamed. Mom said she was handling it, that she was waiting for the right time to tell you. The right time. I laughed incredulously. When would that have been, Jessica? When I was successful enough by their standards. When I gave up on veterinary medicine and got a real job. Don't put this on your sister, my mother cut in. This was my decision. A decision you had no right to make, Grandma Margaret said firmly. That money was a gift to Kate, not a fund for you to manage or distribute as you saw fit. Of course it was your decision, I said to my mother, ignoring my grandmother for the moment. It's always your decision. You've been trying to control my life since I was a child. I've been trying to guide you to help you avoid mistakes, she replied. By lying to me? By stealing from me? I did not steal from you. She roared. I was protecting you from yourself, from this ridiculous fantasy that you can build a stable career working with animals for minimal pay. Sarah. Grandma Margaret's voice cut through the spring air. That is enough. But it wasn't enough. Now that the dam had broken, years of resentment and hurt came flooding out. You've never respected me, I said, my voice shaking. Not my choices, not my dreams, not my work. Nothing I do will ever be good enough for you because it's not what you would choose. That's not true, my mother insisted, but her eyes shifted away from mine. It is true, Jessica interjected quietly. Mom, you have always been harder on Kate, always questioned her choices more than mine. I turned to my sister in surprise. This was the first time she had ever acknowledged the different standards our mother held us to. Stay out of this, Jessica, Marcus warned. No, Jessica continued, something new in her voice. I've stayed out of it for too long. The truth is, Mom, you pushed me toward marketing because it was safe, financially secure, what you respected. You never once asked if it was what I wanted. And isn't it? My mother challenged. You're successful, respected, financially stable. And miserable, Jessica said softly. I hate my job, Mom. I spend my lunch breaks crying in my car and my evenings wondering how I ended up in a career that feels meaningless to me. This confession stunned me as much as the revelation about the clinic fund. My perfect, successful sister, the one I had envied for years, was miserable. You never said anything, I whispered. How could I? She replied, looking at me directly. You were the brave one, Kate. You followed your passion despite everyone telling you it wasn't practical. I took the safe path, the one with guaranteed approval, and I've regretted it every day. This is ridiculous, Marcus interjected. Jessica, you're just stressed from work. You don't mean these things. I do mean them, my sister insisted. I've meant them for years. And watching Mom take Kate's gift and use it to benefit me instead, it's just one more way she's always favored what I represent over who Kate actually is. My mother looked genuinely shocked. Jessica, I had no idea you felt this way about your career. Because you never asked, she replied simply. Just like you never asked Kate if she wanted or needed your protection from her own choices. Grandma Margaret cleared her throat. I think we've established that there have been serious communication issues in this family, but right now the immediate concern is rectifying the financial situation. I agree, I said, finding my voice again. Mom, I want the money Grandma gave you for my clinic. All of it. It's not that simple, my mother replied, but with less conviction than before. The funds are invested in the house and Marcus's campaign infrastructure. There are commitments, legal obligations. Then break them, Grandma Margaret said firmly. Or I will have my lawyers look into charges of financial misappropriation. You wouldn't dare, my mother breathed, her face paling. Try me, my grandmother replied, her voice steel. I may be 78, but I'm still perfectly capable of taking legal action when necessary. Emma, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, suddenly spoke again. Is this why you and Marcus have been fighting so much lately? About Kate's money? All eyes turned to my half-sister, then to my mother and Marcus. The tension between them, which I had attributed to normal marital stress, suddenly took on new meaning. "Emma, go inside," Marcus said sharply. "No," I countered. "Let her speak." "What do you mean, Emma? How have they been fighting?" My sister looked uncertain but continued. "I heard them arguing last week. Mom said the investments weren't performing as expected and that Grandma would find out eventually. Marcus said it was too late to liquidate everything without significant losses." Marcus's face flushed with anger. "This is completely inappropriate. Emma shouldn't be involved in adult financial discussions." "Why?" I asked. "So you can keep lying to her too? Keep her in the dark about how this family really operates." "Kate," my mother said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "you have to understand that everything I've done has been out of love. I wanted to protect you from financial mistakes while you're still figuring out your career path." "No," I said firmly. "What you wanted was control. You took my choices away from me because you don't respect me enough to let me make my own decisions, even when they're different from what you would choose." I turned to face my grandmother. "And you meant well, but you've been manipulating my life from behind the scenes for years. My scholarship, my job, now this clinic. Did you ever stop to think that maybe I needed to make my own way, succeed, or fail on my own terms?" Grandma Margaret looked genuinely pained. "I only wanted to help, to give you opportunities that my generation of women never had." "But they weren't really opportunities if they were arranged, were they?" I replied. "They were just illusions that made me think I had earned something on merit when really it was just my grandmother pulling strings." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Every member of my family had, in their own way, contributed to a web of lies and manipulations that had shaped my life without my knowledge or consent. "I hate you," I whispered, looking at each of them in turn. "I hate all of you right now." "You don't mean that," my mother said automatically. "I do," I insisted, tears streaming freely now. "Maybe not forever, but right now, in this moment, I hate what you've done. I hate the lies. I hate that none of you ever truly saw me or trusted me enough to tell me the truth." With those words, I turned and walked away, ignoring their calls. This time, no one followed except Emma, who caught up with me at my car. "Kate," she said, tears in her own eyes, "I'm sorry our family is so messed up." I hugged her tightly. "It's not your fault and you're not messed up. Don't let them convince you that you are." As I drove away from that house in Bellevue, my phone began buzzing with calls and texts that I ignored. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my family clearly, and now I needed to figure out who I was without their influence, manipulation, and false support. The rebuilding of my life began slowly. Over the following weeks, I functioned on autopilot, going through the motions of my daily routine while processing the emotional earthquake that had shattered my understanding of my family and myself. I continued working at Green Lake Animal Hospital, finding solace in the simple, honest interactions with the animals who didn't judge my choices or manipulate my emotions. Dr. Patterson, my supervisor, noticed my distracted state during my second week back after the brunch revelation. "Kate, you've been quieter than usual lately," he said as we finished cleaning the surgical suite after a routine spay procedure. "Everything all right at home?" I almost laughed at the question. How could I explain that my entire family had been living a lie for years? Instead, I just said, "Family drama. The complicated kind." He nodded understandingly. "Been there. Take your time working through it. You're one of our most dedicated assistants. Don't let family stress derail the good work you're doing here." His words meant more to me than he could know. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone saw value in who I actually was, not who they thought I should become. That evening, I sat in my cramped studio apartment with Oliver curled on my lap and made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what my life looked like when I built it entirely on my own terms. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what had been hidden from me. I spent the weekend researching the documents my grandmother had produced, cross-referencing bank records and transaction dates. The timeline was devastating. The money had been transferred just 2 months after I'd been promoted to senior veterinary assistant, right when I'd been feeling most proud of my professional progress. While I was celebrating small victories and saving every penny for veterinary school applications, my mother had been sitting on nearly $500,000 that was meant to launch my career. The betrayal felt fresh every time I thought about it. On Monday morning, I called my grandmother. "Kate," she said, her voice warm with relief. "I've been hoping you'd call. I know this has been a terrible shock." "I need to know everything," I said without preamble. "Not just about the clinic money, but about every other time you or Mom manipulated my life without telling me." There was a long pause. "Why don't you come to my house this evening? This conversation deserves to happen face to face." My grandmother lived in a beautiful Tudor-style home in the Wallingford neighborhood, a house that had belonged to her parents and where she'd raised my mother and aunt. The garden was her pride and joy, filled with the roses and herbs she'd been tending for decades. She led me to her sunroom, where afternoon light filtered through windows overlooking her meticulously maintained yard. "I suppose I should start at the beginning," she said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. "When you were applying to colleges, your grades were excellent, but your family's financial situation was complicated." I knew this part of the story. My parents' divorce had been expensive, and neither had much left over for college tuition. "I got student loans," I said. "I graduated with debt, but it was manageable." "That's not entirely true," she said gently. "The student loans covered about 60% of your costs. I paid the rest directly to the school's financial aid office." Another foundation of my independence crumbled. "How much?" "About $40,000 over 4 years. I didn't want you to start your career buried in debt." I stared at her, trying to process this new information. "What else?" "Your apartment deposit when you first moved to Seattle. The security deposit was $2,000, which I knew you didn't have. I sent it to your landlord anonymously." The hits kept coming. "Your car repairs last year when the transmission failed. The mechanic bill was $3,200. I paid it and told him to tell you it was covered under some sort of warranty program." I felt sick. Every time I'd felt proud of managing my finances or overcoming a challenge, there had been invisible assistance smoothing my path. "Why?" I asked. "Why couldn't you just trust me to handle my own life?" "Because I watched your mother struggle so much after the divorce," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "She was so proud, so determined to prove she could make it alone. She worked 3 jobs and hardly slept. I couldn't bear to watch you go through the same thing when I had the means to help. But by helping in secret, you made it impossible for me to know what I was actually capable of," I said. "Every success feels hollow now because I don't know what I really earned." My grandmother looked stricken. "I never thought of it that way. I was trying to give you opportunities, not take away your agency." We talked for another hour, with her revealing a pattern of financial interventions that stretched back to my teenage years. Emergency dental work, car insurance payments, even groceries delivered anonymously when she knew I was particularly broke. The scope of it was staggering. "The clinic money," I finally said. "I want it back. All of it." "Of course," she replied immediately. "I've already spoken with my lawyer about recovering it from your mother. It may take some time given how it's been invested, but it's yours." "I don't want you involved anymore," I said, the words harder to say than I'd expected. "I love you, Grandma, but I need to build my life without anyone pulling strings behind the scenes." Her face crumpled slightly, but she nodded. "I understand. And I'm proud of you for saying that. It takes courage to choose the harder path." 2 weeks later, I received a call from a lawyer representing my grandmother. The clinic fund had been recovered, not without significant legal pressure on my mother and Marcus, who had been forced to liquidate some investments at a loss to return the full amount. "Ms. Brown," the lawyer explained over the phone, "the $400,000 has been placed in a trust account in your name. Your grandmother has relinquished all control over it. The funds are yours to use as you see fit." I stared at my banking app, watching the numbers on my screen that still didn't feel real. After years of counting every dollar, of choosing between groceries and gas money, I had enough money to not just attend veterinary school, but to open my own practice if I chose. The question was, what did I actually want? Over the following month, I threw myself into research with the same intensity I'd once applied to studying for exams. I visited veterinary clinics throughout Seattle, shadowing different practitioners and asking detailed questions about their career paths, their business models, their challenges, and rewards. I discovered something interesting. Many of the veterinarians I most admired had taken unconventional paths to their careers. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had worked as a zookeeper for 5 years before attending veterinary school at 30. Dr. Michael Rodriguez had started his mobile veterinary service out of his van, building a client base through house calls before opening a brick-and-mortar clinic. Their stories reminded me that there wasn't just one way to build a meaningful career in veterinary medicine. More importantly, they had all made their choices based on their own values and goals, not on someone else's vision of success. During this period of exploration, I had minimal contact with my family. My mother called weekly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that alternated between defensive justifications and tearful apologies. Jessica sent lengthy text messages explaining how guilty she felt and how she wanted to make things right. Only Emma and my grandmother had earned the right to ongoing communication. Emma would call or text every few days, updating me on the ongoing drama at home and sharing her own struggles with the high-pressure environment my mother and Marcus had created. "Mom's seeing a therapist now," she told me during one of our conversations. "Marcus made her go because he's worried about how this is affecting his political image." "And how are you doing with all of this?" I asked. "It's weird," she admitted. "Like, I always knew there was tension between you and Mom, but I didn't realize how much she controlled everything. Now I'm noticing it with me too. She's already planning my high school course schedule around what will look good for college applications." "You're only 14, I said. "You should be able to take classes you're interested in, not just ones that check boxes." That's what I told her. She said I don't understand how competitive college admissions are now. I could hear the frustration in Emma's voice, and it reminded me of my own teenage years spent defending my interest in animal science instead of business or pre-law. "Emma," I said carefully, "you know you can make your own choices about your future, right? You don't have to follow the path Mom and Marcus think is best." "I know," she said, but she sounded uncertain. "It's just easier to go along with it most of the time." I understood that feeling all too well. 3 months after the brunch confrontation, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of immediately enrolling in veterinary school or opening a clinic, I used part of the money to take a sabbatical. I rented a small cabin on Vashon Island for the summer and gave myself permission to figure out what I actually wanted without the pressure of family expectations or financial stress. The cabin came with 2 rescue dogs that needed temporary care while their owner recovered from surgery. Spending my days hiking with Buddy and Luna, reading veterinary journals, and volunteering at the island's small animal shelter gave me space to think clearly for the first time in years. It was during this quiet period that I realized something important. I didn't want to open a traditional veterinary clinic. What I wanted was to work with rescue animals and underserved communities, providing veterinary care to people who couldn't afford expensive private practice fees. The cabin experience had shown me that my passion wasn't for the business side of veterinary medicine, but for the direct care of animals who needed help most. With this clarity, I began researching nonprofit veterinary organizations and mobile clinic models. I reached out to established practitioners who worked in these areas, asking for informational interviews and volunteer opportunities. Dr. Amanda Foster, who ran a mobile spay-neuter clinic serving rural communities east of Seattle, agreed to meet me for coffee. "It's not glamorous work," she warned. "The hours are long, the pay is modest compared to private practice, and you'll see cases that break your heart regularly." "But it's meaningful work," I said. "That matters more to me than making a lot of money." She smiled. "Then you might be the right fit for this field. We need more veterinarians who are driven by mission rather than profit." Dr. Foster became an unexpected mentor, and through her, I connected with a network of veterinarians doing the kind of work that aligned with my values. I started volunteering with her mobile clinic on weekends, learning the practical skills that weren't taught in traditional veterinary programs. Meanwhile, I enrolled in the pre-veterinary program at University of Washington, using my recovered funds to pay tuition without debt. For the first time, my academic performance wasn't limited by exhaustion from working multiple jobs or stress about finances. I could focus entirely on learning, and my grades reflected that freedom. 6 months after the brunch that changed everything, I finally felt ready to re-engage with my family, selectively and on my own terms. I started with Jessica, who had been the most persistent in her attempts to reconcile. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe in Fremont that neither of us had been to before. "You look good," she said when I arrived. "Rested." "I am rested," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "It's amazing what happens when you're not constantly stressed about money." She winced at the reference to the clinic fund. "Kate, I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know how guilty I felt. Using your money for our house down payment, it was wrong and I should have spoken up." "Why didn't you?" I asked. The question had been bothering me for months. "Were you afraid of Mom, or did you genuinely think I didn't deserve to know?" Jessica considered this carefully. "Both, I think. Mom has always been so certain about what's best for everyone. And honestly, part of me was relieved that someone else was making the hard decisions about your life because it meant less pressure on me to help or get involved." Her honesty was painful but valuable. "I appreciate you saying that. It helps me understand how the family dynamic worked." "How do you mean?" "Everyone benefited from me being the problem child who needed managing. It kept the focus off anyone else's issues or unhappiness. Mom got to feel needed and in control. You got to be the golden child by comparison. Marcus got investment capital for his political ambitions." Jessica looked stricken. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right. And I was miserable in my golden child role, but I was too scared to rock the boat." "What are you going to do about that?" I asked. "I mean, now that you know you hate your career, what's your plan?" "I'm actually considering a career change," she said, surprising me. "I've been taking photography classes at night. It's something I loved in college but gave up because Mom said it wasn't practical." "And now?" "Now I'm thinking maybe practical isn't the only thing that matters. You were brave enough to pursue what you loved despite everyone's objections. I'd like to try being that brave too." We talked for 2 hours, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, I felt like I was seeing my sister clearly for the first time. She wasn't the enemy I'd made her out to be, but she also wasn't blameless in the family's dysfunction. A month later, I agreed to have dinner with my mother, but only if she came alone and only if she was prepared to listen more than she spoke. We met at a quiet restaurant in Ballard, far from her usual upscale haunts. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as we sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I realized I needed to hear what you had to say." My mother took a shaky breath. "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the house, about me never respecting your choices. You were right. I was so terrified of watching you struggle that I convinced myself controlling your options was the same as protecting you." "Why were you so terrified?" I asked. "I was struggling, but I was managing. I was building something." "Because I struggled so much after the divorce," she said, echoing what my grandmother had told me. "I was barely keeping my head above water financially, and I felt like such a failure. When Marcus came into my life and offered stability, I grabbed onto it with both hands. I wanted to save you from ever feeling that desperate." "But you didn't save me from anything," I pointed out. "You just made my struggles invisible to yourself. I was still skipping meals and working double shifts, but now I was doing it while you had $400,000 of my money sitting in investment accounts." She flinched at the bluntness of my words. "You're right. I see that now. I was protecting myself from watching you struggle, not actually protecting you from struggling." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. I need you to understand something, I continued. I'm not angry anymore. I was furious for months, but I'm past that now. What I am is done with the old dynamic where you make decisions about my life without consulting me. What does that mean going forward? She asked. It means if you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect for my autonomy. No more surprise gifts or interventions. No more criticism of my career choices. No more comparing me to Jessica or anyone else. She nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I can do that. I want to do that. And it means acknowledging that the way you handled the clinic fund was theft, not protection, I said firmly. You took something that was meant for me and used it for your own purposes. That's not love, that's control. You're right, she whispered. I'm sorry, Kate. I'm truly sorry. We spent the rest of dinner talking about neutral topics, her therapy sessions, my veterinary studies, Emma's adjustment to high school. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Over the following year, I built a life that felt entirely my own for the first time. I excelled in my pre-veterinary courses, completed my volunteer work with the mobile clinic, and began developing a business plan for a nonprofit veterinary organization focused on serving low-income communities. My relationship with my family evolved slowly. Emma and I grew closer, with me serving as a confidential advisor as she navigated the pressure to choose a practical career path. When she expressed interest in environmental science, I encouraged her to take introductory courses despite my mother's preference for pre-business tracks. Jessica followed through on her career change, leaving marketing to pursue freelance photography. She struggled financially at first, but she seemed genuinely happier. I never realized how much energy I was spending on work I hated, she told me during one of our monthly coffee dates. My mother and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, with clearly defined boundaries. She attended my graduation from the pre-veterinary program without offering unsolicited advice about my next steps. When I was accepted to veterinary school, she congratulated me without adding suggestions about specializing in more lucrative fields. Marcus and I maintained a polite but distant relationship. He had never apologized for his role in the clinic fund diversion, and I didn't expect him to. Emma had become more resistant to his attempts to control her academic choices, which I considered a positive development. My grandmother and I found a new equilibrium. She respected my need for independence while offering emotional support when I asked for it. On my 27th birthday, she gave me a simple card with a handwritten note. I'm proud of the woman you've become, especially the parts you built entirely on your own. 2 years after the brunch that changed everything, I stood in the examination room of my own mobile veterinary clinic, treating an elderly dog whose owner couldn't afford traditional veterinary care. The clinic was small and modestly equipped, funded by the money my grandmother had originally intended for my career but operating according to my own vision of what veterinary medicine could be. Will Rosie be okay? Asked Mrs. Martinez, an elderly woman whose fixed income barely covered her own medical care, let alone veterinary bills. She's going to be fine, I assured her, administering the antibiotics that would clear up Rosie's ear infection. And don't worry about the cost, we work on a sliding scale based on what people can afford. As I packed up my equipment and prepared to drive to the next appointment, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my real life, a life built on my own values and choices rather than others' expectations or secret interventions. The money my grandmother had intended as a gift had ultimately become something even more valuable, the foundation for building a career that aligned with my deepest values. But more importantly, the crisis had forced me to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to earn approval or prove myself to others. That night, I called Emma to check in on her college application process. "How's it going with the environmental science programs?" I asked. "Really well," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "I found this amazing program at University of Washington that combines environmental science with animal conservation. It's perfect for what I want to do." "And what does Mom think about it?" "She's still pushing for business school, but I'm not letting that change my decision. I learned from watching you that sometimes you have to disappoint people to be true to yourself. I smiled, feeling proud of my half-sister's growing independence. That's exactly right. I'm proud of you for figuring that out at 14 instead of 26. As I hung up the phone and looked around my small apartment, comfortable but modest, decorated with photos from my mobile clinic work and certificates from my veterinary program, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This life wasn't the one my mother had envisioned for me, or even the one my grandmother had initially tried to create. It was smaller in some ways, less traditionally successful than what my family had wanted. But it was mine, built on choices I had made with full knowledge of the consequences and trade-offs involved. Sometimes the most profound gift isn't getting what you thought you wanted, but discovering what you actually needed. My family's betrayal had ultimately led me to a truth I might never have found otherwise, that the only approval worth seeking is your own, and the only success worth achieving is the kind that aligns with your deepest values. The veterinary clinic I had built wasn't the prestigious practice my family had imagined, but it was exactly the career I had always dreamed of, one where I could make a real difference in the lives of animals and the people who loved them. And perhaps most importantly, I had built it entirely on my own terms, with complete knowledge of every decision and sacrifice it required. That, I realized, was worth more than any amount of money or family approval. It was worth everything.